Good evening, everybody. I'm Clive Watkins. I'm the Director of Advancement of our school, the American School in Japan, and welcome to the second ASIJ 2030 session of the year. I've actually been saying this quite a lot lately, and while I hesitate to say that there could possibly be a silver lining to COVID, it has helped us, or actually forced us, to realize that we can hold meaningful global conversations in the virtual world, and we're looking forward to continuing to do this with everyone. Before I introduce tonight's guests, I wanted to take just a minute to differentiate, especially for the parents joining the call, the three different online parent partnerships that we are running at ASIJ. We started this last year, and we're continuing to do it this year. In general, the ASIJ 2030 sessions, of which this is one, we invite outside professionals, and they're designed to build an understanding in our community of our strategic design framework and how our portrait of a learner is redefining vigor, and what this reimagined vision of learning looks like in practice across all sections of the school, not just the high school. We really want to make sure that we're asking the right questions and challenging our assumptions for what a rigorous college prep school might look like in the future, in 2030, if not earlier. Our No Value Care Partner Series, these are generally conducted by our colleagues with occasional visits by outside professionals, and these are designed to strengthen our parent or home school partnerships, focusing on a variety of topics. It could be anywhere from parenting in the digital age to addressing substance abuse and social emotional wellness. And then our third one are our Mustang Connections. These are done on a monthly basis by each of the different sections, and they're really just an opportunity for routine interactions between parents and the leaders, the counselors, and teachers who work in your children's division. And by the way, you don't have to be in the division in order to attend those. Perhaps you have an elementary school, maybe going up to middle school next year, and you want to see what those discussions are, so you can go ahead and join those. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. We're going to do 75 minutes. I try very hard not to go over time. We did that last time, but we're going to try to make sure we don't go over time this time. There is a Q&A function. It's not anonymous, and so please go ahead and submit your questions at any time throughout the session. Whenever it's appropriate, we will try to insert it and ask our guests those questions. And again, they're not anonymous. There's an upvote thing, so if you see your question has already been asked, just click on that, and we will get around to the questions. So I know that we've had many sessions now excuse me, where we've been able to interact with globally recognized thought leaders in education, but I think this is the first time we've actually been able to speak with those people who design the physical environments in which students are experiencing their learning. Joining me this evening is, of course, Head of School Jim Harden, and Bhupesh Upadhyay, who is our Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer for the school. And joining us from New York and New Jersey, from Ennead Architects, our partner Don Weinreich, Principal Alex O'Brien, and Associate Todd Van Varick. Let me just give you a little blurb about Ennead, although I'm sure they're going to tell you more about themselves too. Ennead Architects is based in New York with 55 years of experience. The firm is internationally recognized for its planning and design work, principally in the public sector for educational, scientific, and cultural institutions. The firm has developed full master plans and other enhancements for several larger EARCOS schools. For the uninitiated, that means the East Asia Regional Council of Schools, and that includes the Seoul Foreign School, for whom they did some work, as well as schools in the Middle East and Europe. The firm has also worked on master plans and building projects for universities such as Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Penn, Columbia, Cornell, and Stanford. Ennead is here to discuss the way our buildings shape us and to share their insights about modern, purpose-built schools. So if I can hand it over to you guys, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Clive. Good to see you, Jim and Bhupesh and colleagues, and good evening, ASIJ community. We're excited to be meeting with you, and we'll be in Tokyo very soon to kick off our master planning work that we're doing together with you. But what we wanted to do this evening was stimulate a discussion that's really meant to be mind expanding in a way. We're not going to talk about specific solutions that we think are appropriate to ASIJ. We haven't worked with you for long enough yet to really know what the right answers are, and we see this as a co-discovery process. But instead, we're going to explore some topics and themes that we think are relevant to the way we think about the physical needs of schools. So with that, Alex, we can proceed. So again, thank you for introducing the three of us who are on the panel this evening. Two other key members of the team contributed very much to what you're going to see, and you'll be meeting some of these folks in a couple of weeks, Min Tran and Anders Evanson as well. So we're the team. Interestingly, some of you may recognize the person on the left. This is Anders' younger sister, Ingrid, who is a graduate of ASIJ, now a Cornell architecture student, and we were thrilled to give her an internship this summer. She got to do a little bit of work helping us prepare for our master plan activities with ASIJ, and we can validate with full confidence the quality of an ASIJ graduate, and we hope she returns to us in the future. She was really delightful and amazingly productive. So let's keep going. This is, in a way, kind of our mission statement about the creation of architecture in the public realm. There's also a very strong humanist bent to our work. We've won over 370 awards, 14 national AIA awards, which, if you're a by the numbers person, that is significant. We're now 58 years in business and are doing more and more projects that achieve a very high level of sustainability. The firm was founded in 1963, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It was founded by James Stewart Polchek, and went through a series of subtle name changes as the firm evolved and grew up until 2010, which was shortly after Jim's retirement, where the partners at that time changed the name, but it's the same firm. And then in 2013, opened our office in Shanghai. I wanted to come back to this because the roots of the firm, interestingly, began with a major project for Tianjin, the Tianjin Institute for Biomedical Research, which is not very far from the site of your school. So it's kind of interesting to know that we're coming back very close to the firm's roots, and we're of course very excited about that. And I think the next slide shows that initial project from 1963, which is a textile research factory. A little bit more about the firm. We're proud of its growing diversity. In terms of tenure in the firm, people tend to stay quite a long time. 13 different languages are spoken, and I'm very happy to report that center metric about male-female ratio has shifted even further, and we're now, I think we've achieved 50-50, which is great, and we're not done yet. Our staff come from 24 different countries. A very high percentage are licensed architects, which is a little bit different from some of our peers, and we're also really on a mission to diversify the firm in terms of race and culture, and we've now achieved a 40% non-white demographic. Next. We work in a broad variety of different markets, from culture, hospitality. We do a lot of museum work, performing arts, government work. We have a growing body of commercial work, especially in the Asia regions. We do healthcare and civic work, but today we'll be talking about education. Next. We also operate a little operation that we call Ennead Lab. It has its own website if you're interested. You can find it at enneadlab.org, where we conduct self-generated research around topics that we think are very important, very timely, but may not yet have a client. So this is where this is really truly our laboratory. So we work on projects from, food insecurity to water purity to what will the impact of electric vehicles be on cities? how can cities begin to address issues around climate change and sea level rise, to how can we help the United Nations address the crisis with the growing number of refugees in the world. So it's an interesting little thing, and I would certainly invite you to explore it. In the academic realm, and Clive already touched on this, these are some of our projects and some of our clients. You can see the names for yourselves, but they really run the gamut from centers like the one we did for Stanford that are really meant for developing a tight-knit culture for a special cohort of students who didn't really have an anchor institution within Stanford. We've done museums on campuses, research laboratories, professional schools, and lots of undergraduate facilities as well. Next. In the world of K-12, these are some of our clients. We're going to be very proud to be adding ASIJ soon. Actually, I guess we can add you now since we've begun. So I imagine some of these names are familiar to you, and they really run the gamut from schools that have somewhat traditional educational models to ones that are incredibly progressive and experimental. So we've had a wonderful chance to play with all of these different modalities of pedagogy. And on the next slide, you'll see an image of some of the projects that we've done for these various K-12 schools. I'm going to begin to transition now into the next chapter of our talk today with a statement: the thing is not the thing. What this means to us is many architects feel that the building they produce is the thing, it is the destination, that artifact. It needs to be beautiful, it needs to be strong, it needs to have all these great physical characteristics. Our view is that while the thing must be beautiful and it must be durable and all that good stuff, the real thing is how do people engage it? How do people use it? And nothing thrills us more than to see the work that we do overtaken by the public or by a community and really adopting it and making it their own. And there's a kind of breathtaking image on the next slide showing an example of what happened at the Brooklyn Museum after we completed our work there, designing this new front entrance, the new plaza, and it's now kind of the central location for a major parade route that happens once a year in Brooklyn. So this is incredibly exciting to see how the public takes it over. Okay, next. Time for a sip of coffee. As we've begun our engagement with you at ASIJ, we've been looking closely at this kind of six-petaled flower that you've created with these different modalities: mindset, communication, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and global citizenship, all feeding into this idea of sponsoring deep learning within your students and within your faculty. So we also wanted to do a little bit of a tour back through history to see what lessons might there be, or what are the trajectories of these different themes. And this is really kind of light stuff and just for fun, but it is very clear to us that for centuries, architects and educators have been commingling what they know to create spaces in which people can learn in different ways. So this is a fresco of Plato's Academy. We can go pretty fast through these, Alex. This one is interesting. This is a guild-based education from the 1600s. So hands-on learning had its roots then. And interestingly, the idea of apprenticeship and students engaging very closely with adult masters. This is from the 17th century at Terakoya. It was a school in Japan, and we won't zoom in on it today, but if you look it up and see what's going on, there's a lot of incredibly active learning going on, even in the 17th century. Very interesting. The next slide shows the Shogunate Academy at Gakumonjo. So the importance of a strong, coherent campus structure is very evident here. And we'll, of course, be looking to derive some lessons from this, whether it's gardens or buildings, active spaces, quiet spaces. This is all great fodder for thought. Here's an example from early 20th century Eastern Europe, where by transforming the type of furniture that students use, it sponsors a very different kind of relationship between students and between the educational material that they're using, because they're not isolated on individual desks. So they're relating to one another and the material in a purposeful way. Next. The American one-room schoolhouse, another very interesting model where you can see that the teacher is focused primarily on her small group of younger children, while older children are doing self-directed study, and presumably she rotates around, or the kids move up to the front in different age groups, and she can somehow keep this very large group of very different students all making progress together and all forming a very close community where the different ages feel quite connected to one another. Froebel introduced the idea of a more tactile and sensory-based education system. He actually encouraged parents to suppress their children's verbal and reading skills and to live in a tactile and sensory world for as long as possible. I'm not saying we're going to recommend that, but it's nonetheless important with the invention of kindergarten and all the activities and modalities that went along with it. And that developed into, as you all know, because many of you are educators, the Montessori system, where that got further developed and formalized and really very, very popular worldwide. Next. The blending of open air teaching, the importance of light, air, and views is a very important theme, and I think one that we definitely feel is very important in the context of modern K-12 education. This is an example from Amsterdam. I think it was built in the 1920s. It's still an operational school, and if you look closely at what's going on at the corner, the facade of the building actually steps in. So each of these 4 floors has an open courtyard at the corner so that play and activities can take place indoors and outdoors in the incredible generous facade that brings so much light, views into the building. We now know is has a great stimulating effect on the mind. Next. A model like the Dalton Plan, which encouraged a high degree of independent research, even from very young children who are given an assignment. They use laboratories throughout the facility to further their research, but always have a house, which is really a homeroom, to return to. Also requires a very different kind of physical response in the architecture. Another model, of course, is one that's much more regimented around what happens in military schools. Certainly can produce a fine education, and it's a different type, standing in stark contrast to the type of education that one might find at the Green School in Bali, which is really focused on the environment and on local culture and allowing that kind of engagement. Maybe one could even think of it as a blend between something like the Dalton Plan and Froebel. Next. There's been an emergence in the US, and I don't know if this is happening in Japan, where high schools are bringing college curriculum into their schools and conferring college degrees to their students. So one can now graduate from certain schools, certain high schools in the US with an associate's degree. And one of the interesting things about this is it creates a condition where students who are really hungry for more knowledge and are motivated to acquire it, they can be fed as much information and as much learning as they're capable of taking in, and work at a highly accelerated pace at a higher and higher level. this has had some interesting outcomes. And then I think the last slide, which is here, just sort of a joke, but what is the future of high school? Does anyone really know? Or what is the future of school? And for eons, there have been speculations. This, of course, is a little cartoon from the Jetsons. And we are here to work closely with all of you, with your community and your leaders and your students to go on that path of discovery.
So that's a kind of a look at yesterday and a brief rumination on a history of some learning spaces. Let's now turn our focus on what's happening today, and we're going to walk through some major themes or trends that we're experiencing in our work designing learning spaces around the world. And we wanted to start with this diagram. I suppose you could call it alarming, but this is a kind of worldview that frames a lot of what we think about campus design and the design of education spaces today, which is that there is an ever accelerating change in our world that we have to respond to, whether it is climate or population or resource use. This acceleration is leading us into the unknown in terms of what the world we inhabit is going to look like for our children's futures. And we are seeing that our children are acutely aware of these challenges that they're facing in the world that's changing around them, and in some ways more aware and more focused on these changes than we are. And the reason we start with this is because one of the themes that kind of informs all of the other the issues that we are looking at in designing education spaces and learning spaces is the notion of resiliency. There's such uncertainty ahead, and we're already seeing big pressure points in regions and with institutions, whether it is with dealing with global health crises or dealing with hurricanes and monsoon seasons. Preparing a campus environment to receive the future and to be durable and resilient is one of the most important things that we can do as we begin planning out the future of a campus. So, in the past, we would think about something like this as just let's have a recycling program, or it would be a kind of small bore solution. But now our focus is actually holistically on everything about a campus, whether it is the siting, the landscape, the choice of plants, the way a building consumes energy, or receives or protects itself from the sun, air quality, and the kind of quality of environments and the way they support the students, and the way all of this absorbs major fluctuations in climate and basically anything that puts pressure and stress on a campus, we have to consider when we think about how to plan it out. You're going to see this project quite a bit threaded throughout. This is Solfaren School, a new high school we did for them after a master plan that opened about 5 years ago that Todd and Don and I worked on. And so Todd, you can sort of take us through some more of the resiliency themes here, and we'll keep moving.
Sure. On the theme of resiliency here at Solfaren School, I'm just, the building was, that's okay. Building was carefully positioned within the context of its landscape to promote access for the students to that landscape. The landscape actually comes through forms the main entrance, and on the back side of that main entrance, there is an equal landscape within a courtyard. And this really promotes the student in its understanding of the building's responsibility within that landscape and gives them direct access to it, not only physically, but visually. Next slide, Alex. Thanks. And here's an inspiring image of a ASIJ student already accessing the landscape through ASIJ's curriculum. And we already know from working with ASIJ the importance in the curriculum for students to have access to the landscape through its journey of learning. Next. And you'll start to see some themes throughout our buildings and how important it is for us and our understanding of the building's relationship to its context and its landscape. Here is the Knight Center at the University of Oregon. It's a research facility, a network of elevated pathways around the building, heavily wooded region in the US, and a region that is known for its responsibility in environmental conservation. Another project with a theme where it provides students visual and physical access to a landscape. Again, it's building's relationship to that landscape and its responsibility to that landscape and its resiliency. This is a Denning house at Stanford University. Next. Another inspiring image of an ASIJ student. And again, it's an example of how the landscape and environmental issues are at the core of some of ASIJ's curriculum. A student here in the courtyard at the entrance to the campus. Another inspiring image from ASIJ. I believe this is a snippet from a TED Talk from a recent student and his delivery and his position on the importance of resiliency in his education and in the future, in his future.
Yeah, so before we move on to the next theme, it's worth noting there aren't many pretty pictures of it, but another important aspect of resiliency that Bhupesh is keenly interested in is just planning a campus that operates efficiently, that makes smart use of its resources. Everything from choosing building systems and structural systems and trying to reduce operational costs and create flexible environments that can adapt to change. All of these things, in addition to the kind of pretty environmental factors that we went through, are factors that that we're keenly focused on as we look at planning campuses, and will be keenly focused on with ASIJ.
This might be a good time for me to jump in also with this question that Kristen just asked. And by the way, Christy and Betsy, I have your questions here, and we'll get to those. But again, the timing on that seems right. If it's okay with you guys, if I can throw this question in.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Given the acceleration of change, how can you create a campus that refreshes itself and supports revolution? I think in a certain way. The current campus is nearly 60 years old, which we would all agree is overdue for reinvention. What is the right cadence today for refresh? Are these projects now only good for 5, 10, 25 years? So how do we make sure that we're planning for something that might address what we need in the future?
I think that's an amazing question. I'll take a quick swipe at it, but I think, Kristen, you really put your finger on right at the heart of an important conundrum. Let's call it a conundrum, that the rate of change with pedagogy in the world way outpaces the longevity of individual buildings. So I think a conventional response to what you're saying, to your question, would be we design with flexibility, we design with modularity, and we try to avoid over specificity, because if we just use one dimension, educational technology, it has a shelf life of probably 5 years at the most, and after that there's something new and no one knows what that is. So we shouldn't try to imagine that. I would think that there could be an even more radical approach of intentionally building more economically and less, less precious buildings, so that manipulating them was less of a financial hardship, and you really accept this kind of constant rate of steady change, rather than believing that we've solved it, we have our campus, it's never going to change again. The downside of that is the sense of history and attachment begins to be lost. So it's a roundabout way of saying I'm not sure, but it's a really cool question.
It is a cool question, and hopefully we're going to kind of more fully address it throughout kind of the rest of this presentation, where we dig deeper into these trends. But we do not think of architecture as disposable, and durability is an important factor in this for us, and which creates a little bit of the conundrum that Don's talking about, where we want to make buildings that we recognize they're major capital investments and have huge impacts on the institutions that we design for. So we build them to last, 50, 100 plus years, and to that point, a lot changes over that time, and so making sure that you're making design choices that are going to be adaptable. Creating flexibility within that durability is a kind of 1-2 combination that is critical when you're thinking about how to grow a campus over time. And we'll show some examples as we move through here of what we mean, especially by flexibility.
Alex, I was going to add that I think you'll see throughout the themes, and it is at the core of good planning of the buildings, and really at the core of this master plan effort. And I think the stewardship of that master plan, and enough flexibility built into it, and enough resiliency built into it, that it can be shepherded along by what sometimes ends up being many different generations of students and parents and administration.
You got more for us, Clive?
No, that's it. For me.
But I think
that's it for now. I've got a couple of others that were pre-submitted, but I'm going to wait and try to find the right point for it. Let's keep going.
Terrific, and that really is a great sort of framing question that we should keep in mind as we're going through the rest of this information, because I think that question sort of gets at the heart of what we're all doing here, really. So there are 4 other themes that we're seeing here. Every one of them is an important part of a resiliency mindset. It's important to note. So that's why we actually started with resilience as the theme. But PE has been a part of all of our lives. The notion of sort of exercise or the kind of physical component of health, but increasingly we're seeing and responding to a whole health agenda in our planning and our design, a real focus on mind and body, and supporting the health of all of the community of users, and especially students. And how do we do that? Another Seoul Foreign School example: creating spaces that encourage movement, that are flooded with daylight, that support community and give a lot of different ways for the community to interact, that support counseling services, as well as kind of the more physical components, and just create a framework to really celebrate humanity and give people the kind of space they need to develop their minds and bodies in healthy ways, is a huge part of our design agenda. And it's really important when you're thinking about how to plan a campus. Todd, you can jump in here.
A little further, I mean, I think Alex is hitting right to it, that the questions that we bring into our thought process and design process is, how can we introduce elements and aspects of the design that promote health and wellness? So here, the example on the screen is Seoul Foreign School, a vertical connector through the building via a switchback stair, but this becomes the place that students want to be. It's the forum, it's the hub of the building. and therefore promotes movement and use of that stair and circulation through the building. The health and wellness is in our planning of our buildings has gone way beyond just the poster of the food chart and some PE stats. Here's an example at Sarah Lawrence Visual Arts Center in New York. Again, this is art studios that are designed around roll-up doors, garage doors that allow direct visible and physical access to the landscape and use of landscape and promoting health and wellness. This is the McCombs Business School at the University of Texas, Austin. Again, creating shelter, creating places that are comfortable for students and faculty to access landscape, promoting movement and health and wellness.
I think this delicate relationship between indoors and out is really important when at the master plan level that we're embarking on with ASIJ, to really think about the connections between indoor and outdoor space and the quality of interior and exterior space, because the space between between buildings is just important to the learning ecosystem as the buildings themselves, and so it becomes a really important part of the of supporting overall well-being.
An inspiring image from ASIJ, and the notion of health and wellness and how that revolves around physical activity and sporting teams and the community that the sort of cellular community that those teams build. Here's an example at the Cathedral School, and again, it's moments of respite. Places that students can be. So this is less about movement and physical well-being, but more of sort of mental well-being, a place to relax, to get away, to have a sort of moment to access landscape visually, to sit in a window and either do some study or, just contemplate is really important in our planning to create spaces that promote this. A project here in New York City. This is the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts, arts-oriented program. But this is an example where the health and wellness through the dance curriculum is on display. It's celebrated. This is, I forget the avenue this is off of, but right off a major New York City avenue. And this is an example of a contemplative space, very important. It's neutral. This is a project for Kuwait University, and also a large aspect of health and wellness and planning of buildings to be sure that we're creating these spaces that promote, a place for all religions and contemplative spaces to be.
So we got into this a minute ago, and let's come back to it. Every space is a learning space in the way we think about our education design, and thinking about classrooms as being kind of inherently infinite is a kind of novel approach, which is to basically design for flexibility in your learning spaces that can do exactly what the question we were answering before was driving at, which is how do we create learning spaces that are adaptable to changing needs. So we used to think of classrooms as sort of an inherently fixed bucket of space, and really the only thing that we had any agency about within the classroom to change it was to change the furniture out and the finishes from time to time. We tend to think of classroom design a little bit differently now, and we look at the structural systems and the layouts of buildings to create contiguous space that can be adapted to different class sizes over time. And then Dawn mentioned something that is super important in thinking about how to make our classrooms more adaptable and more infinite, which is the issue of specificity. We've found that, especially with new teaching and learning technologies, a lot of times learning spaces get built with such specificity that they're not really adaptable anymore. You know, but when they're laden with computer screens and specific equipment, and very kind of specific layouts, they don't really respond to changes in need as much. So our approach here at Solfarin School, this is just one example of a classroom there, but it was to actually reduce the specificity, to maximize the amount of usable surface around the room. Interestingly enough, this photo doesn't show all the writing surfaces that are behind you in the image, although the kids also use the glass to write on and to pin up on, to not encumber the space with a bunch of specific technology, but just to create projection surfaces and ceiling mounted projectors that are easily replaced as technology advances, and to spread as much electrical power around the room as possible, which you also can't see in this image, unfortunately, and to create teaching surfaces that support multiple kinds of engagement, whether it is front and focused sort of teacher-centric engagement or team-based engagement. So all of these factors are built into what we call the infinite classroom, which is essentially a classroom framework that is designed to be more adaptable to evolutions in pedagogy. Here's a planned example of that. Todd, you can take over here.
Yeah, I wanted to expand a little bit. I think going back to the question that was posed about, the planning and future and flexibility of the buildings. I mean, this is really getting to right sizing the cellular unit of an education building, the core classroom. And it goes beyond just saying that it needs to be larger or getting the one size bigger pants. And thinking that you're going to fit into it, it's really right sizing the modularity of it. And we'll see some examples further in where that modularity then becomes, creates the ability to plan the building, not only out of the infinite classroom or universal classroom, but embed some specificity through the curriculum. As Alex mentioned, just one more note on that diagram. These spaces were developed with the notion that every surface was a teaching surface. And Alex mentioned that the students are encouraged to write on the glass walls, not only the interior walls, but the vision lights, the exterior walls. So every surface was had a notion that it was a teaching surface, and encouraged to use as a teaching surface. And it really enabled us to kind of decentralize technology. Technology wasn't the initial driver. We didn't develop these spaces around a new flavored technology, and made the technology very simple and straightforward to switch out as it advanced. Next slide. Here's an example of a similar design space at the Westminster schools. Again, the kind of modularity of the classroom, or the sort of cellular unit, planning unit of the building. This is a sort of a tech lab, double height space off of a space that we call the forum. Next slide.
Guys, this might be a good time for me to jump in with several of the questions that we're getting. They're really great questions, and I think some of them are probably somewhat related, but I'm looking at the pictures, and as an example, seeing lots of glass, lots of light coming in. So Ari had a question about how does climate change affect or influence architectural designs that you're considering. That is somewhat related to another question on here. from Hans, with the growing focus on carbon neutrality, what is your firm's outlook for the feasibility of creating carbon neutral buildings? How do you measure that carbon footprint? And is this something ASIJ aspires to? I think we can answer yes on that. I saw a nod from Jim there. Is this a good time to throw that?
Sure. No, I think it's great. And, you know, we truly prefer a conversation to a long presentation. So please keep the questions coming. They're quite stimulating. And why don't, to my colleagues, why don't I suggest that maybe one of us take each of these, that we can keep going, and then kind of go from there. I can give a quick response to Hans's question about carbon neutrality. Embedded in that question is a really interesting point, which is how do you even measure it, and is there universal agreement on it, so that we're all talking about the same units and the same terminology. So that's one of the first things we try to level set with anyone we're talking to. You know, how are we going to measure how we're doing in terms of carbon? So there's embodied carbon, how much carbon is involved in the construction of a building, and then there's also operational carbon around its total life expectancy, and there are lots of fine points to that. And I think maybe the last thing I'd say is it's very possible, it is measurable, to achieve extremely high levels of responsible consumption and sequestration of carbon in the building of buildings, and we'll be closely focused on that as we go forward. Maybe Alex or Todd, you want to talk?
Let's talk about how we design buildings for changing climate, which we certainly are always focused on that. One could look at all of this glass in these buildings and think, well, that's hot, and you really have to no, you're adding all this sort of air conditioning to make the building work. But the reality is that daylight is a critical component to sort of contemporary buildings that can respond to changes in the climate. First and foremost, we're reducing lighting loads in buildings is a prime goal of ours. And so here at Sulforan School, for example, the lights out in the classrooms are on have sensors so that they only come on when there's not enough light in the space being provided through the glass. And so daylighting strategies are a health and wellness strategy, and they are a climate response strategy, but they have to be carefully considered because you're also introducing heat into your building and potentially glare. So if we come back to these this flexible module, classroom module that Todd was talking about a minute ago, it also shows the daylighting strategy for these classrooms, which is that you don't actually have an infinite amount of glass and on the exterior. What you're looking at here is the little fins here. These vertical fins are on the outside of the building, and they are so that's the view out of this typical classroom. And the point to make here is that we invest in systems in the design that actually help us to modulate daylight in order to control it, not just to create better learning spaces, but also to be more responsive to climate. But there are a lot of other factors besides daylight, obviously, that go into making sort of buildings that are sensitive to changes in the climate. Air quality is a huge one. We know, I mean, it's a huge one in Seoul. It's been a huge one during the pandemic. So systems that keep that are better at filtering air and providing healthy indoor air quality are increasingly important. So thinking about how air moves through a building and what kind of mechanical systems we choose to move that air around is ever important. And then how we respond to the site, and especially for ASIJ, as we begin to think holistically about the campus, thinking about campus systems, campus infrastructure, stormwater, and the sort of use of the land as much as the design of the buildings will be important factors, right down to material choice of new buildings, like here at Seoul, where we chose as many recycled or recyclable materials as possible. We tried to limit the number of materials we use in the building, and really let the sort of architecture and the views of the campus do the talking for us. Just to kind of get back to the flexibility theme, because I actually think that it's great to ask this question about preparing a building for change around flexibility, because that's really one of the best sustainable measures we can implement, is spaces that actually can adapt to changing needs or changes in program without too much waste. And just this slide is to point out, these are the art studios at Seoul Foreign School, but they're all in the same module that Todd was talking about here. So we use the same module, but we can adapt it programmatically on day one to art or science or sort of generic classrooms. Again, not creating a sort of specialized footprint, but just working within the kind of structural framework of the building, and creating spaces that can adapt to different needs. So it's important to limit specificity, so you're not creating spaces that aren't adaptable, and that was certainly our approach here at SFS.
One thing to add to that, Alex, I think behind the frame of the image at Seoul Foreign School, based back to the modularity of it, there is, it was pre-planned this way. Areas within that art studio that can be easily or already set up like a typical classroom. And that one was to promote a future flexibility as needs change, but also to promote sort of a cross-pollination through the curriculum, that an English class could easily adapt to holding a class session in the art studio if those curriculums sort of crossed over. And something in the art studio was paralleling something that was happening, for example, in an English class. So there's a lot of flexibility embedded in naturally into the planning of the building. And just to round out this section, this is an example at the University of Arizona, the business school. It's a higher education building project, but again, it's one where the building is dynamic and introduces the flexibility of spaces through this large open door on good weather days. This forum space that's created in the center of the building is really activated by allowing direct access to the interior.
Oh, that door actually folds up?
It does.
Yeah, it's a giant hangar door. It's a more radical form of flexibility where you create spaces that can flex in scale over a period of minutes just by opening a big door. And of course, having a climate that supports that is a helpful thing. And we find it, it's harder to pull these kinds of things off up here in the Northeast where we are, but in environments like in California or Arizona, you have so many good weather days where you can do this.
Right.
This is a new project at the University of Texas, and flexibility in classroom environments involves not just classrooms that can change over time, but classrooms that really can change modalities from moment to moment. So arranging classrooms where you can shift focus from team-based learning at the table to presentations at the front of the room, and to allow a classroom to actually simultaneously operate with those two modes of learning and other modes is another important aspect of thinking about flexible classrooms, meaning not just flexible to changes in pedagogy over time, but literally flexible minute to minute and day to day, as you know, with the different needs in the classroom. And this is a fun one that we did for Shanghai Children's Library, and this actually is a good transition into the next theme, which is as important as classrooms are, and they still are important. One of the most important things is really the spaces in between the classrooms. We're finding that, you know, it used to be education planning really used to be about getting that module, getting those classrooms fixed, understanding what your class size was, getting the right number, and then making sure you had your lunchroom and your gym and your auditorium in the right place. Double load that corridor and you've got a school, and that is a dead model for us, because really the spaces beyond the classroom are equally important as learning spaces. They're equally important in developing community and creating social and learning environments that are dynamic and engaging. So we tend to think of an entire campus, and certainly each building as a learning ecosystem of different types of spaces, and then always seek to create some linkages between them. So here at Seoul Foreign School, again, to continue to use that example, you see the typical modular classroom space, which is visible through the window on the right, and how that links to a corridor that expands into collaborative space, casual space that can be used in a range of ways, and students have access to this space all day long. So this notion of the spaces in between is increasingly important in educational environments. Todd,
the previous theme. Yeah, just the previous theme as well, and flexibility. I mean, these have very specific adjacencies in how they're planned, in trying to promote the classroom being somewhat seamless between the in-between spaces. And they really sort of promote kind of the overflow or the outflow of the classrooms. They're not intended to be used just at period change. But as breakout spaces, as group-based learning or whatever is happening in the classroom, that classroom is encouraged or promoted to spill out into these spaces, and they really are activated throughout the day. Another example here of that, where just through very simple programming in a circulation corridor, in a little flare out space within that circulation, there's a whiteboard in places to see and gather. Again, a spill out space that's encouraged to be used throughout the day, even during class. Next slide. This is a similar example at our project at the Westminster School. This is an addition and a renovation to the upper school. And this is a breakout space off of a corridor in the foreground and in the background of classrooms. And it's really intended to encourage the students to use not only to socialize and but also to collaborate throughout the day and throughout their time in class. Next slide. Back to some of the earlier themes of access to the landscape. This is an image of, I can't quite remember what school this is, where just outside the building, an area to promote classwork or, group work outside the classroom. And another image of Westminster School. This is directly off of the space that you saw a little earlier within the classroom types. And again, creating these in-between spaces, it's kind of the glue or the network that ties the cellular unit, the basic planning building block of a school, the classroom, together. And we often try to or describe these spaces as the forum. They're spill out spaces that are flexible in nature and can be set up to hold large group activities, lectures, meetings, or in this image, just study.
This image shows another thing that is important to note is that our learning spaces, learning environments that actually have a proper amount of third space or space in between the classrooms like this also were far more successful in adapting to the pandemic because the space network was more conducive to the kind of social distancing that you actually see here in this photo, where the kids are able to kind of spill out and space and space themselves out in these third spaces. So that kind of space planning, it actually requires more area in a building. You have to have bigger social spaces, more corridor, more what we might refer to as inefficiency in the planning, but that additional space actually performs a really important function, extending all the way to creating buildings that are more adaptable and resilient during, say, a global health crisis.
Also should note too, I forgot to mention this, that they really also promote interaction between students and faculty as well. I mean, they're not just for the students, just having this social network, this kind of in-between space, and in the examples that we've shown so far in school and Westminster, to think of it that way and to be sure that the spaces are developed so that faculty do have access to them, they are encouraged to use them, and it creates this sort of spontaneous collision between faculty and faculty and student, students and students.
On that note, let me throw another question at you, and I'm also cognizant of the time. We're at just gone 8 o'clock, and I want you to finish your presentation, but I also want to throw some of these questions at you. Betsy was asking if you have any concrete examples where students were involved in the planning of an education facility or in the focus groups, and how did their ideas contribute to the design that you came up with?
Todd, do you want to take this?
Sure.
We were talking about this yesterday.
I mean, it's really exciting and really important for us to engage with students, particularly during these early planning phases of the project. And we tend to approach it in a way that it's not a wish list or, what is it that they would aspire to have out of a school, but more encouraging them to talk about their experiences in their current spaces. And that kind of brings up to the surface for us, through the student's lens, what it is about ASIJ, what it is about their fellow students, their teachers, and their spaces that will help encourage us to develop a space that is very much ASIJ. We do get to some specifics about, what would you desire out of a space or a classroom, but we try to approach it that way, that to encourage the students to talk about their experiences, their spatial experiences, their social experiences.
Yeah, Jim patiently has his hand up. Why don't we call on Jim?
Yeah,
I was simply going to tell you, gentlemen, when you're visiting us in a couple of weeks, we're definitely going to put you through your paces. We've got a lot of student focus groups set up for you. So you're going to hear from our 4th graders, you're going to hear from 3rd graders, 5th graders. We've got a good group of students in answer to Betsy's question. So you're definitely going to experience a lot of student feedback, I think, when you come to see us.
no,
Which is so exciting for us because, back to Don's comment about how the thing is not the thing, we recognize that the work we do is actually supporting communities, and it's for people and primarily for our children. And but I think Todd's response is an important one, is that, we also don't approach it like we're just sort of fulfilling a wish list for everybody that they just get to put in their order and we deliver it, but rather really listen, trying to hear what, how people want to interact and what their needs are, and then kind of respond holistically. But a concrete example of how those kinds of conversations led to something specific at Seoul Foreign School, when we were developing the kind of lowest level of the high school, which was more of a sort of shared, it's the library and the cafeteria and the multipurpose room. Through conversations with kids, we realized that the cafeteria wasn't enough, and that we developed off the cafeteria a cafe that's actually run by a really nice bakery owner in Seoul, who actually comes and runs the cafe. So it's some of the best coffee and pastries in Seoul. But that cafe was really driven by a lot of ideas students had about how they wanted to be in the school, and so it quickly became a social center for the high school when it opened, and incidentally also became a really important sort of hangout space for parents, because they would come and drop their kids off and maybe they had a meeting later on or wanted to be somewhere for a couple of hours. So it really created a kind of interesting dynamic on the campus, and that was all derived directly out of input from the students. So those kinds of things certainly do happen for us, where direct engagement with user groups and students yield sort of definitive design choices.
Guys, do you want me to go on with questions? How many more?
I think we can get through the rest probably in 5 minutes if we step on the gas.
Yeah, I think
but there's
so.
some important content here.
Let's
It's
do
a
that.
slow build, but
we'll try to get these questions. We'll do our best, but let's
Yes.
make sure we get through your presentation.
Well,
Great.
look, let's just kind of burn through this last one, because you're already doing this. I mean, you have a whole purpose-built building around this, but the real world and hands-on experience is increasingly an important part of any curriculum, and the most iconic examples of those are maker spaces like this one again in Seoul, or the kind of upgraded one, 23,000 square feet of engineering makerspace at the University of Texas. This kind of hands-on experience is what everybody tends to think of, but beyond that, here at Lycée Français, we have content creation and sort of green screen studio space, or at Cathedral School, a kind of hands-on sort of science lab. On your campus, a rice harvest, or like an actual sort of outdoor gardening experiences and hands-on experience within the landscape is increasingly important. Robotics clubs and all of those kinds of things, which most schools have in their curriculum now. So these have really changed the way we think about how we engage our learning spaces every day. In some cases, they do require specific space types, but more they just require a mentality of rolling up your sleeves and doing stuff. So, we want to craft educational environments that support those kinds of activities and celebrate them through visibility and transparency and so on. So. I think that was the last of our 5 trends. So I figured I'd get us through that one really quickly and move on to. So we talked about yesterday, and then we talked a little bit about what we're seeing today. So the real question for ASIJ is what's next, what's on the horizon, and we're eager to explore that with you, because we don't have a crystal ball any more than you do, but here are just a few provocations. First of all, it might be that the given what we just went through with the kind of move away from just a classroom model towards hands-on learning and spaces in between, that the classroom itself is diminished as the basic building block of a school. And instead, if we think of school as a learning space network, a kind of sequence of different types of space with different uses and different furniture, all set up to support different types of learning, in a more fluid fashion. That's where we see education environments headed, and the library might be an important part of that. No longer a book repository and a place where you go just to get information from a librarian, but perhaps a network of different resources that are actually not singularly located in a building, but spread throughout it. And we've seen models like this where I know there's an elementary school in excuse me in Texas that has it put its library literally in the corridor. They decided they weren't worried about securing their books, so they put the shelving in the corridor, and the library is spread throughout the entire school. So thinking about these sort of venerable space types like a library as something that actually can inform the overall space of a campus or of a building could be a really exciting way to rethink education space. Pushing a little further, learning is still organized around grade levels and around schools. This is true even, it's decreasingly true at the university level, where departmental space is giving over to sort of theme-based investigation or precincts that are built around issues, and that might be true for K through 12 environment, where we start to think about ordering a campus not around grade levels or divisions, but around themes or precincts like STEM or the arts or climate or some other issue that we want to actually organize a building or a sequence of spaces around that supports multiple grades and or divisions, and that comes in the form of with one of our schools. They have a set of institutes that are focused outwardly to relationships off campus with other institutions, and those institutes are one is a Global Studies Institute that is attached to the English and history classes. There's another one that is an engineering institute that's focused, that's attached to their STEM curriculum, and then there's an arts institute that's attached to the arts curriculum. So thinking about ordering a campus or a school around institutes and themes and issues as the sort of primary way of ordering it might be another way that we could head. And then just thinking about how students interact and how they learn, move towards self-directed or self-paced learning at the individual level, and then combining that with more team-based learning, possibly, and I know Ulka talked about this a couple of weeks ago, across ages and grade levels, creating teams that are actually more mixed in terms of the level of knowledge and the age of the student. Could be an exciting way to start to think about how to reorder the campus and to think about what kind of educational spaces might be required under those models. And then giving those teams that are more self-directed and self-paced some real-world experiences, sometimes centered around technology, which is playing an increasing role in our educational experiences, and sometimes not, but creating real world opportunities or hands-on opportunities for those teams, and thinking about educational spaces and learning spaces that allow that is another kind of exciting thing that seems to be evolving. And then lastly, just thinking globally, going back to your deep learning model and the global mindset, really thinking beyond the campus about your situation within Tokyo and the opportunity to really leverage the city as a part of your campus. But also maybe we turn to the the campus and think of it as a city. We think about the dynamics of a city, the issues, the kind of social and political and infrastructural and kind of interpersonal issues that drive a city, and we think about the campus in that same way as being dynamic and exciting and having all the kind of components that you would think of in your own neighborhood. So that, you know, the old way of saying that is to think globally and act locally, but really kind of expanding our thinking about what a campus can be and how it can interface with the world around it is a kind of exciting prospect, and your campus here has so much promise, and it needs so much attention, and so we're excited to be thinking about what's next with you in the coming months.
Thank you, guys. We are out of time, but I am going to give us a few more minutes because I was blabbing on to start with and took away some of your precious time. I think any one of these questions could take half an hour to respond, but let me go with the most popular one here, which is as Chad says, a very basic question. Maybe I can actually throw this at Bhupesh. What is the scope of the master plan? Is it a total tear down and rebuild of all the Chofu campus buildings, or what is this master plan, Bhupesh?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's going to be something we have to work through as a community, right? I mean, we've got two buildings right next to each other that tell the story of time. You've got the Donut building, and then you've got the Creative Arts Center, the CAD building, which is the newest building, and then the Donut, which is our oldest on the Chofu campus. So I think just from the conversations we have with our community members and what we think about and what the plan would be eventually for a campus to redo the Chofu campus, we'll have to see what we want to incorporate and what kind of changes we want to do. Putting on my operational and finance hat, I mean, I can tell you that it's kind of hard to think about tearing down buildings that are relatively new. So I think that would be a bit challenging to think about, but it's something that we as a community, I think, need to decide on. You know, what are our priorities? What do we think is important? And how do the spaces that we're envisioning for the future that we're going to be partnering with Ennead with, how do they fit in with the whole campus, and what makes sense and maybe what doesn't.
Excellent. And that, you know, there's some other great questions here, which I know you guys can see, and I guess we can address a lot of these when you're here in a couple of weeks. But you know, one like the one Seth has, nobody wants to be going to school in a construction zone. So how will that end up working out so that it's not interfering with the education of children? So again, we don't have time to answer it right now. But great questions, and I love Nicole one question too about plants indoors to help filter the air out also. So everybody, I wish we could continue with the questions, but we're already at 8:20 here this evening, so I want to be cognizant of people's time and call it a day at that point. But these guys are going to be here in a couple of weeks and visiting with various people, speaking with people, and we're really looking forward to this. It's an exciting time for the school as we start planning things out. So I want to thank our Ennead Architects for being with us this evening. Jim and Bhupesh, thank you for being there also. And it has been recorded this evening, so we will make sure that we get that out to everybody who registered and also to the rest of the community. We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks then.